All right, my friends, welcome back into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. This is episode 194. And man, I'll tell you what, I know I say it every time, but today's episode is truly special. My guest on the show is a longtime friend of mine, an amazing educator, an incredible thought leader, Bradlee W. Skinner. Now, I would tell you, Bradlee is an award-winning theater director, English teacher, and an incredible advocate for arts education and teacher retention. But his story goes so far beyond the classroom. Bradlee has lived the challenges of burnout, self-doubt, and even at a point in time stepped away from education altogether, only to ultimately come back stronger, more purpose-driven, and much more committed to making a true impact. In this episode, Bradlee's going to open up about failure, about resilience, and about the power of second chances. We're also going to dive into teacher leadership and why that really matters, how school culture and climate impacts retention, and why shifting from classroom management to classroom leadership is the key to empowering students. I'll tell you this, if you've ever faced those challenges, those setbacks, if you've ever questioned your impact, if you've ever struggled with burnout, this conversation is absolutely for you. Bradlee's one of my all-time favorite people. He's one of my dearest friends and somebody who has made a huge impact on me, not only as an educator, but as a human being. I know you're going to love this conversation, folks. So let's get right to it with Bradlee W. Skinner. All right, everybody, welcome into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Man, I say it every time, I think, that I'm excited about an episode, but this one's really special. Today on the show is my really good friend, Bradlee W. Skinner. I have no idea what we're going to talk about, to be perfectly honest with you. I know we're going to talk a little bit about teacher leadership. I know we're going to probably talk a little bit about some shared time that Bradlee and I have together in our past. And who knows what else we're going to talk about. But before we get to that, Bradlee, thanks so much for finally joining me here on Leaning into Leadership. I can't believe it's taken this long to get you here on the show.
Oh, absolutely. It's an honor and a pleasure. I'm excited to be here. I've been, a long time obvious fan of the podcast, but a much longer fan of you and your leadership. So I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And it goes both ways. Absolutely. So let's do this just really quick, just to kind of orient the audience a little bit into who Bradlee W. Skinner is. Jump in the Wayback Machine, go as far as you want, and just give us a little bit of who Bradlee Skinner is before you and I dive into our conversation.
All right. So I am in the middle of my 24th year as an educator. I teach English and theater. Theater was my undergrad work, and then added a master's in English to be a little bit more marketable was the plan. Really loved literature, teaching that. Taught for 12 years, and then found myself not loving theater, not loving teaching, not loving education as a whole. And I think this idea of educator burnout, I really found out what that meant and what it felt like. And I realized that it wasn't so much about teachers ever getting burned out. It was more of teacher beat down. Like I just felt downtrodden, stomped on. And I reached a point in my career where I really felt I had nothing to offer. And if I didn't have anything to offer, then why keep doing what I was doing? So I ended up leaving education, and then found myself in an even worse state of not knowing what to do or even knowing who I was at that point. And decided, after about a year and a half of struggling to find myself, of struggling with life in general. And luckily I had some former students that reached out to me and were telling me, hey, I think you're really still needed in the classroom. You have more to offer. So I decided I'd start looking at getting back into teaching again. Ended up getting my administrative license and working to learn just more about how I could hopefully keep educators like myself from ever feeling that way. And when I decided I was going to get back in the classroom, I needed to find the right place. And I started interviewing again and trying to find a school and an environment that reminded me of why I got into teaching in the first place, what I loved about education. And I eventually found that in Wyoming. And that was because of a school leader that decided to give me that second chance, to give me another shot. And that was, you yourself, Dr. Darrin Peppard, who offered me that opportunity to come and teach and to really just to prove myself again in a way that I don't think I really had before. And that's what brought me back to education. And so for the last, 12 years since then, I've been really focused on not only helping my students, but also in helping other educators around the country to not fall into some of those same traps that I did. I really work hard in teacher retention. I'm a big advocate for the arts in schools and for school leaders to be able to help them help their teachers, so those teachers that want to stay in the classroom don't ever feel like they have to leave.
Yeah, it's some really powerful stuff there, and I want to stay first on the keeping teachers in the classroom piece, and then I want to come back a little bit on your story. But as you know, I spend a lot of time in a lot of schools around the country, and teacher retention it's a challenge. It's a concern. A lot of people are worried about losing teachers. And when I was a building principal, one of the biggest things you worried about with losing teachers was losing them to a different school or losing them to a different district, or maybe they were going to move back home. Now, much more, educators are leaving the profession. They're not just going, hey, I'm going to leave this school, I'm going to go work over here. It's I'm going to go in a whole different direction. And certainly as somebody who went down that road, I'm curious, and you talked about it, this teacher beat down, and I get that. I do think, unfortunately, sometimes that's just a harsh reality. Right now, we're in a really politically charged environment right now. I know state of Wyoming, where you are now, my home state, not the only state in the union that has or had some pretty bizarre bills make it, out of committee and legislation. But I think there's just so many different challenges for educators, and so let's maybe go back a little bit to that point for you when you were kind of weighing that, in your own words, do I still have something to offer? What were some of the challenges that you felt, and what were some of the things that led you ultimately? I mean, share as much or as little as you want here, but that led you to say, maybe this isn't the space for me anymore.
It's definitely one that's tough for me to talk about. I'm still working on, really in sharing my story and coming to grips with the challenges and the difficulties that I had. I'm doing a lot better at it now. But a lot of it came down to the fact that I slowly got conditioned with accepting that my value as a person was connected to the value that I contributed to my school. And so what I mean by that is, being a theater director, we would do competitions, and at competition, we took, the 14th in the state, my first year at one of the schools I was teaching at. And it was like, well, that's not good. You should be in the top 10. So I worked harder. Next year, we're in the top 10. Okay, how come you're not in the top 5? So I keep working harder and harder. And then all of a sudden, we're in the top 5. And then we're in the top 3. And then all I was hearing from people around me was like, well, how come you're not first? Why aren't you the top of the state? And so I kept putting more and more work in, more effort. And by doing that, I started having less time at home, less time with my children, less time with my wife. We recently found an old camcorder that we had a bunch of DVDs, those small little DVD camcorders. And we're watching all these videos the other day and just reminiscing when, all of our daughters now are grown, they're all out of the house, and we're watching these videos when they're little kids. And as I'm watching it, and I'm these tears of joy as I'm watching my little girls. But then I started to notice I'm not in any of these videos because I was always at work. And so when I wasn't making those success rate that I really was trying to do, while at the same time detrimentally hurting my family from the amount of time I was away from them, there was such an imbalance in my life that I just started getting that point where if I'm not winning, if I'm not doing this, then I'm losing. And then I started to feel that weight. And it got to a point where I hate to say it, but I still remember sitting in my car as I watched the rain pouring down on the windshield to mask the tears that I was crying, when I realized that if I didn't change my life, that the trajectory I was going, I wasn't going to have a life anymore. I saw what it was doing to me as a person, and I got to a point where I was like, I need help. My mental health was so terrible. My physical health was awful. And I knew that if I didn't leave teaching, that I was going to do something permanent that would have had horrible ramifications for my family and for everybody in my life. And that was a tough realization. And I didn't realize just how bad things were for me at that time. And I called my wife and told her, look, I have to leave. I can't do this to myself anymore. We had no idea what was going to happen. We had no idea what I would do for a job or how we were going to survive or any of that. But I was blessed to have the best person in my life to say, it's okay, we'll figure it out, and I'll be by your side the whole time. And it was tough. We now had no job. We lost our home. Here I was with 3 little girls, and, we were homeless. And that was tough. I hid that part of my life for the longest time. I tried to not talk about 2013 in any way, shape, or form. I wiped it off of all accounts of social media. I never spoke about it for years because I was so embarrassed about who I was at that time, and I wanted nobody to know me. I didn't want people knowing who Bradlee W. Skinner was. I only saw all the failures of my life. And another one of those great blessings that I had was when I decided to come back to teaching, I was given that second chance. I remember we were sitting poolside in Orlando, and still being embarrassed about my past. That you looked me in the eyes and you told me, you have to control your narrative. It's your life. It's your story. Don't let somebody else tell it for you, because their version will not be the version that's the true one of you. And that's when I started opening up and talking about my mental health more, talking about the benefits of counseling, and talking about my past and sharing it with other teachers, and even sharing it more in open formats, social media, podcasts. And I went from being so embarrassed about who I was in 2013 to realize, no, because of who I was that year, it's made me who I am today. And I'm stronger because of it. And I can help other people avoid those same pitfalls, but I can't do that if I don't talk about it. I can't do that if I'm not open and honest about it. And so just that one conversation really just reframed my entire view of my past. And it helped me realize I don't have to be embarrassed by it anymore. I can own it, and I can make the most of it. And hopefully by making the most of it, I can help other people at the same time.
Yeah. Well, one, I appreciate you sharing all of that. I mean, I know the story, and I've heard the story many times, and you and I've had some very deep, tear-filled conversations about the story. But I appreciate you sharing that very much. That's not really what I was trying to get at, but that's okay. I appreciate you sharing that, and I guess where I want to go with that, and this is kind of what it makes me think about. And I appreciate that you bring up that conversation, with us sitting poolside in Orlando, and we're at a conference together, and with a group of students, group of adults. And one of the reasons that you were part of that, from the year that we hired you, when we hired you in 2015, almost immediately, some of our student leaders picked up on these natural leadership abilities that you have. And as you gain some confidence in your classroom, again, the kids were really starting to see that. And some of the kids came to me and they're like, we had our Jostens Renaissance team, which was really our school-wide culture and climate team, and it was student-led, and it was our students who came to me and they're like, hey, we think Mr. Skinner needs to be a part of this. And Jordan Jacobs, I'll never forget Jordan coming and saying that to me. But what I want to get at here, and where I'd love to have you talk a little bit, you were there because you were a teacher leader on our campus. And even though you were just your first year on our campus, I've never been that administrator who feels like you need to be on the campus for 15 years before I can allow you to be a leader. Everybody can lead. You've heard me talk about this before. Every single adult has the opportunity to lead on a campus. And you stepped very naturally into some teacher leadership roles. And what I'd love to get to here on the podcast today is to talk about the importance of that teacher leadership. And I know in your current role and in your current school, not only just in your school, but in your district and statewide, you are definitely a leader in what you do. Talk a little bit about that perspective of teacher leadership. You talked about you went and got your administrative degree. I even brought you up to the office for a year as a kind of a pinch hitter on my leadership team, and you did a fantastic job there. But you don't have to leave the classroom to lead, and you're an exceptional example of that. So let's talk a little bit about teacher leadership, and maybe even share along the way maybe some breadcrumbs of ways that teachers who are in the classroom and still want to lead in their building can get actively involved.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I think it stems from, the leadership in your building. Are your school leaders, are your administrative teams giving opportunities? And I think that's so much of it is we don't recognize opportunities, or we're not offered opportunities. The offering is going to come from, administrative saying, hey, can you help us with this? Do you have ideas that you could share? Or would you like to head up or tackle this item? And but then recognizing opportunities comes from just the see a need, fill a need. And teachers, I think often we get stuck in our cave of a classroom, like, hey, that door shuts, this is my world, I don't need to extend outside of those doors. But it's such a great opportunity because it's going to show our students that we can also do the same thing for them, offering students opportunities to lead and to be more than what they might think of themselves. So I've seen school leaders, we've worked with school leaders who may not realize that they're actively discouraging leadership from their teachers. And it's very much of a kind of a stay in your lane mentality. And I hate to kind of use that phrase, but sometimes it gets that way. Like, well, I'm the leader, you're not. You're a teacher, stay in the classroom. But when you have that culture and climate in a building where it's like anybody can lead, and we're fostering that, we're building that culture, that's where I think educators can really shine. And I didn't know that I had that opportunity because in some of my past, it was that active discouragement. Teachers do not participate in assemblies with students. Teachers don't have a student versus teacher basketball game or a dodgeball game or something because it's separate, But then you have a school, it's like, well, why not? That sounds like fun. Let's try it. And that willingness to just say, hey, if it works, cool, let's do it. If it doesn't, well, then stop it. It's pretty much that simple. And so immediately having those opportunities when I came to your school, where all of a sudden it was, hey, kids have this idea. Do you think it's possible? Sure. Okay, cool. Why don't you guys figure out how to make that possible? And just having a vote of confidence from a school leader to go and fix something, to make something better, to improve an assembly or a rally or a homecoming football game or whatever it might be, just knowing that you have your administrative team believes in you and trusts you to figure it out was really what took it for me to say, okay, I can step up and I can be a leader outside of my classroom walls. And that was new. That was new to me in my teaching career. because the other buildings I was in, it was just so compartmentalized. And I think that as school leaders recognize what that does for your culture and climate, that's such a positive thing. That one, it helps take it from, sometimes there's a lot on an administrator's plate that are these small things that just, they often might get overlooked because the larger things that administrators have to take care of are really much more important in their day-to-day routine. But by giving some of the teachers opportunities to step up, to take over things, not to say, hey, we're putting more on your plate, but just simply to say, hey, this is in your wheelhouse and we think that you can help us here. But giving teachers those opportunities to say, we believe in you, we respect the work that you do, and we could really use your help here, is such an easy way to start that teacher leadership aspect.
A couple of thoughts that come from that. One, folks, if you listen to the podcast regularly, you know that I've told my story, especially that first year or so as a building principal, thinking I had to do everything, thinking I had to put on the cape, be the superhero. Bradlee came to my school several years after that. After I had put away the superhero cape and really started to lean in and allow so many other people to just really take off. And you probably came at just the right time. But I was having this conversation with a few school leaders on Friday. We were talking about this before I hit the record button. But on Friday, I was working with a school, with a district in Illinois. And after, doing my keynote, leading some workshops, that kind of stuff, spent some time with the leadership team. And as a leadership team, one of the things that they were asking about was, how do I get my teachers to take the initiative of doing things? This is an administrator who I think he's the fourth in 5 years. Many of the teachers have, they pulled back into their cave, as you put it, and just kind of, they're stuck in this is just the way things have always been. And honestly, Bradlee, you worked with a handful of those people who, even after you and I both left the building, they were, yay, this too shall pass, right? I mean, they were just stuck in the mud. So you're not going to move everybody. But But one of the things that he had said to me, and it caused a thought, so I'm going to share my thought, but then I want to ask you about it. I want you to run with it. But he said, I know I can't do it all. And I know I have people who want to step up, but I don't want it to come across as I'm putting this on your plate. I'm asking you to do more. You mentioned that in your previous response. And it made me think, I saw this on social media just the other night. Mutual friend of both of ours, good friend of mine, Charles Williams, has this new shirt. I'm just a teacher with the just crossed out. And, there should be no such thing as I'm just right. I remember when, and you were in the building at this time, when we had the U.S. Department of Ed come and visit our school, Island of Excellence, all this stuff. And one of our EL aides, Patricia, wanting to talk to me, and I introduced her to the dignitaries, and she's like, no, I'm just a para. And I'm like, no, there's no such thing, right? The just a teacher thing happens. And so often, it could be because that's the way the administration leads the school, or that could be the culture from the top down from the superintendent. I mean, you and I certainly worked under one who was that way, right? We also worked under one who was not that way. But that just a mentality it's so disempowering. And in so many ways, sometimes I think it's self-inflicted. And maybe I'm wrong here. I want to hear it from the teacher perspective, like the whole just run with that.
I think it applies to the whole school. And again, it's back to that culture and climate. If, I never want to hear even my custodial staff say that, hey, I'm just a custodian. It's like, no, you are a professional who is doing an incredible job of making our school look good. So removing that tag from everybody. And I think sometimes it's perspective. We even talked about it with our bus drivers. Our bus drivers are like, hey, I'm just a bus driver. It's like, no, you are the first line and the last line of defense that we have for a kid having a good day or a bad day. You're the first person that they see in the morning that works for our school district, and you're the last person that a kid sees that works for our district. And they might have a great day, or they might have had a terrible day, and you can help make it a little better. So you're not just a bus driver. You're an incredible piece of this huge puzzle that makes our school district successful. But again, a lot of times they're like, well, they need to hear that you see it that way. A custodian might not see that, hey, I really value what you do because you make my theater look so good. And that makes it an enjoyable place for our audience to come in. A bus driver may not hear how much you appreciate what they do because they're just in their own world. But they need to hear those things. They need to understand it. And it all goes to that culture and climate. And knowing your staff, and as we say, knowing your staffalty, because everybody in that building is that professional, they need to hear those things. But they also you need it as a school leader, in whether it's a teacher, anybody needs to know how to approach them right because of that culture. For some, they want that in front of the whole faculty. Here's your Golden Apple Award, or here's your Tireless Tire Award, whatever it might be. And for them, they're like, man, I needed that. I needed to know that what I do matters and that I got respected for it. But then you might have that other teacher that certainly doesn't want it that way. That's the teacher that the bell rings, that last student is out the door, and you just stop in their classroom and you just, hey, you did awesome today. I just wanted you to know that. They don't want to be called out in front of their peers. They don't want the apple to be put on their desk. They just want that individual recognition in front of nobody but themselves. And you have to know your staff. You have to know your team in order to make those things happen. And I think that goes as you say, everybody wants to be seen. They want to be heard. They want that respect, but we also have to know how to deliver it in the correct way so they don't feel like they're just a para or just a bus driver or just a custodian. They're valuable members of our team.
So let's go inside the classroom walls now. We're going to talk here in a few minutes about your contribution to Culture First Classrooms, which, by the way, is fantastic. But before we do that, I'm just curious. I'd love to have you share just your philosophy, your how you go about this, and maybe I will do this. You know what? To lead into this, here's where I'm going to go. I'm going to share this, folks. This is just a little snip of what Bradlee has written as his contribution in Culture First Classrooms, my new book with Katie Kinder. Just one tiny little snippet. Bradlee says, I've never been one to find joy in the term classroom management. You see, I don't want to manage my students. I find the more accurate term to be classroom leadership, as leading our students is more of what educators do. That philosophy right there, I think this is why you and I have the relationship we have, or at least why it began, because we share this philosophy so very much. So inside the walls of the classroom, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that classroom leadership, that classroom culture that you work so hard to build in multiple spaces in the building that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to it. It's so hard to kind of break it down. I think a lot of reason why I wrote what I wrote there, that I've just been discussing William Shakespeare's Henry V with my students, and compared that to the French armies that were leading from the back and telling their armies what to do. And then we see King Henry, who is at the campfires and talking to his men and knowing them by name and calling them by name and talking of their contributions, and then leading the battle from the front, that his armies were willing to follow him anywhere. That's that kind of leadership. And he didn't manage his armies, he led them. And I kind of, started sharing of how I wanted that to work in the classroom and what that looks like. And it's true. I don't want to manage my students, because management always seems to be reactionary. If we're talking classroom management, are we reacting to the behaviors of our students? Are we reacting to a situation that takes place? And I don't want my classroom to be reactionary. I want it to be forward thinking. I want it to be that I'm helping lead my students, and then they lead themselves to greater things. And a few years back, one of the great things that I was able to do with my English class is the second week of school, we got told there's a class size that's too big to fit in the room they're in. We need you to move. And it's like, we just started the school year. I just had my entire classroom set up, and we're 3 days into the school year, and now you're telling me I have to move everything? Like, that is so horribly inconvenient for me. However, I'll do it if it's best for kids, and if you let me set up my new classroom any way that I want. They said, okay. And so I sat down with all my students, created a Google form for them, said, all right, fill this out. I want some feedback. And I asked them, what would a classroom look like? If you as a student could create your ideal classroom, what would it look like? What would it be? And then I went through all their notes, and then we talked about it. We had a nice roundtable discussion of what students that, in this day and age, what they wanted from a classroom. And especially being one we're teaching upper level English with a whole lot of literature and ACT prep. And so their statements were, we'd really like a classroom that looks and feels more like a bookstore or a coffee shop and less like a traditional classroom. I said, awesome. You've got the weekend. Go make it happen. So the students started reaching out, and we got a lot of donations, and things came in, and we took out every single desk that was in that room. We brought in couches, chairs, bean bags, high back bar size tables, and just completely redid the classroom. But with the main emphasis being that from any seat in that classroom, you can see every other student and look them in the eyes from every seat that you're in. So it's very circular. And just seeing what that did for the culture of our class, it allowed us to really have some deep discussions, because you're looking at every single person that's contributing, and it encouraged more discussion because now there's no back of the classroom. With it being so circular, every seat you're in is still kind of the front of the classroom. You can't hide behind anybody. And being able to look their classmates in the eyes as they're having these conversations, these discussions, there was far fewer behavioral issues, because now kids weren't saying inappropriate things or hurtful comments. And, because now they're looking their peers right in the face, made a big difference. And we just started seeing this change in the culture within the school and within my class specifically, that, no behavioral issues, our off-task time dramatically decreased, workload increased, test scores increased. It was awesome, all from being told the second week of school that I needed to move rooms, and which something that could have been really frustrating and angered me quite a bit ended up being one of the single best things that I could have done for myself, for my teaching, for my students.
I think that's really cool. And yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to make the lemonade, right? I mean, that's just the way that it goes. But and I have not seen that room. I've seen pictures of that room, and certainly some video of the room and that kind of stuff. I think it's really cool. And I think just one quick follow up on that one, because our time is already flying away from us. But I think there are some teachers who will hear what you just said and say, "Oh, that's really great," and Bradlee Skinner can do that, but I couldn't do that. And mostly they would say it. And honestly, I'm thinking of somebody in your department, in your building, who I know, and I won't call her by name. I adore her with all my heart, but I know she would say there's no way I'm letting that much control out of my hands. How do you, when people come to you, I know you heard this in our building together. I know you hear it in your current building. When people see how comfortable you are with giving the keys to the students and letting them drive, those who maybe are a little hesitant or borderline control freaks who just can't let go, what do you share with them? What's a piece of advice that you would give people to maybe give them the keys for a little while?
For me, it really, and I get it. I have a very different personality, that, it works for me because that's who I am. And that's why I can teach the way that I do. And maybe it's not for everyone, but when I really look at the big picture, is if my goal is to still teach and to do the best that I can and get the most out of my students, then there's some, things I might have to do a little bit differently. If I have a student who, if I lose time in my class every time that this kid asks if he can, get a drink of water, get up, or he's super fidgety, I'm losing time every time I'm interacting with him. But if I just say, hey, look, you don't need my permission to get up and walk around the room. If you just feel that you are too antsy and you just need to walk, you're still listening to me as I teach, right? Yeah, of course. Okay, then you don't need my permission to get up and walk around my room if that's what you feel you need. Or that student that is super fidgety and is bouncing all the time, that I can go, all right, hey, I'm going to put a bungee cord at the bottom of your desk so you can bounce your feet on it. Will that help you out? He's like, yeah. Okay. It's because then that I don't lose that time that I'm addressing that one student. They can self-manage and I can take care of what I need to. And a lot of times it's just finding something that simple, that if there's something that's taking my time away, or any teacher, if there's something that's taking your time away from teaching, how do you address that? And it also, I love it because it lets me just straight up ask my students what their needs are. I let them advocate for themselves. Part of that leadership opportunity that I can give to them is I don't have to give them a solution. They can advocate for themselves. They can come up with a solution. They can create things that help better my classroom. And a lot of times those student ideas, if it's, kind of that, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander theories, that if it works for that student, it might end up working for all of my students and I can implement it into my room. I think another thing when it comes to, how do you help your teachers without feeling like you're burdening them by putting more on their plate? As I mentioned earlier, one of the best things that I've seen, we saw it at our school in Rock Springs, I've seen it at other schools, is on professional development days. So much we're often like, who are we bringing in for PD, or what are we going to do for this? But when you have those days, you can say, we've got experts in our building. Just ask your teachers, what would you like to teach? What do you need? And giving teachers an opportunity to say, hey, I'd really like to share this. And almost doing it like that ed tech element where here's 6 different classes from the teachers in your own building. Go pick which ones you think you would value the most and gain the most from, and go learn from them. And letting those teachers step up and say, I've got something to offer. That's huge. And it's you're just offering that leadership opportunity to say, I'm an expert. I'm going to share this with you. And I think of, one of the first ones that we ever did with Google Classroom, because I'd worked with Google, but our school district was just starting. It was like, hey, Mr. Skinner, you've worked with Google for a couple of years. Do you think you could teach some of our teachers? I was like, well, why would I do that? I was like, I'm just a teacher. I had that just mentality.
Speaking of having to move you to a different room, I had to move you to the library because everybody wanted to learn that from you. Yeah.
And it turned out great. It was so good.
Yeah.
And it then went from me, being this teacher that just, was just a teacher as the way I thought of it. But afterwards, I think I ended up going on and teaching 5 or 6 different Google Classroom courses around the state after that.
Yeah.
But it started off with me being confused as why somebody would ask me to do it. Because I didn't see that I had something to offer. And maybe you might have teachers in your building that are just like I was, that didn't see they had something to offer until they were asked. And man, I learned so much from my teachers. There's so many other some of the best professional development I've ever had has been directly from people in my own building and not from a professional. They've just come from the person down the hall because they understand what I'm going through. They know what we're trying to get better at. And that's been some of the best PD days, are those when I'm learning from my peers.
Yeah, those Ed Camp days that we did were, man, they were epic. I still to this day remember, man, I'll tell you what, I remember your Google Classroom sessions, partnering up with Angie Spann to do even more, different Google things. And then I'll never forget, and I don't know what the session was, but I happened to get in there and Brian, our band teacher, Julie, one of our rock star math teachers, having this deep discussion around pedagogy, math and band, and math and music, and not clashing, but completely agreeing and oh my gosh, I can't even replicate the conversation that they had. But I remember just
So
thinking,
good.
oh my gosh, this is a gold mine. We have to keep doing this. And I know the staff absolutely loved it, which I think made it even better. And it increased
Oh, yeah.
the amount of teacher leadership on our campus because, people were just having those conversations about pedagogy in the hallway now instead of, oh, it's another PD day. It was, yeah, I can't wait for this. And then people were, coming and tracking you down or, going and talking with, whomever, right, about the things that they were doing. So great point there. I love that one so much. And see, this is the kind of insight that you're going to see when you get Culture First Classroom. So there you go. So shameless plug. The book's coming out soon. You got to make sure you get your hands on this because guys like Bradlee Skinner are in it. It's going to be a fantastic book. So Bradlee, our time has absolutely flown, which I knew it was going to.
It sure has.
But before we wrap it up, yeah. Oh, and it's just so much fun, right? I was telling Bradlee folks before we hit record, having a conversation with somebody last week, and we were talking. And I mentioned Bradlee, and that person had no idea that Bradlee and I actually used to work together. Just that, I think people think that we just are connected because, like everybody's connected on social media, and we are connected on social media. But yeah, we actually got to work. We worked together for 3 years and have a long-standing streak at the Jocelyn's Renaissance Global Conference. I don't even know how many consecutive years it is. We'll see. Hopefully this summer it can continue. But we've presented together for, I don't even know how many years.
10 years?
Now. 8 years.
Yeah, 10,
something like that.
10,
yeah.
I think.
10 years. 10 years. Yeah,
I think
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
This
Because it goes back to your first year with us together. So
yeah.
So there you go.
That's wild.
So let's do this. We're at that point in the show. I'm going to ask you the same thing I ask everybody else. And you've hit so many great things, but I'll give you an opportunity to maybe go down whatever road you want to go here. This is the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. So tell me, Bradlee, some things you're doing to lean into leadership right now.
For me right now, my biggest push and what I hope that my students are able to learn from is to lead and to find leadership through failure. And I know that might sound a little odd at first, but I'm seeing so many students today that would rather avoid trying hard things because of the fear of failure. It's easier to just avoid it. Don't even try. And there's so much that can be learned and valued when we realize that it's okay to fail if you learn from it and improve and then take the steps to get better. But this fear of failure just debilitates so many people that they'd just rather not do it. But man, I was there. I was in that same boat, and I had so much fear in my life, fear of judgment, fear of what other people would think about me, fear of the future. And it was debilitating. But to realize now that it's okay to fail. It's okay when you have good people that are around you that are going to make sure you succeed because they want the best for you. And I want to be that type of teacher for my kids, that they know it's okay if they mess up, that they're going to learn from it, they're going to get better, and I'm going to be right by their side that whole time, step by step, to let them learn through failure, to let them learn that they can improve, that failure is not the end of the world, that it's simply a step in learning. It's an important part of the learning process. And we can get better as students, we can get better as teachers, we can get better as leaders through failure when we look at it through that lens, that it's not the worst thing in the world that can happen to us, but it can actually make us better, it can make us stronger, we can be smarter from it. And I think that's my goal right now with leadership, is just letting my students know it's okay. And if we have a misstep here and there, it's more about, are we headed in the right direction than how quick it is that we get there.
Now that's wonderful stuff right there, man. I appreciate that so much. And, I'll tell you, as somebody who, got to work closely with you for a few years, you completely embody that. And I think that is an absolutely spectacular answer. Look, people are going to want to get in touch with you. They're going to want to be following you. If they're not already connected with you, how do people get in touch with Bradlee Skinner?
So on all social media platforms, you can search for Bradlee W. Skinner. Make sure that's Bradlee with 2 E's, named after my father, who recently passed away this last summer. So keeping that name is an important thing. So Bradlee W. Skinner. And also you can find me there. And that's going to be on Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, even TikTok. And that's probably the best way to find me. And I'd be happy to reach out and help you in your journey in any way that I can.
All right. And Matt, just such amazing stuff. I'm so glad we had the opportunity to spend some time together. Always appreciate sitting down with you. Always appreciate the stories. Always appreciate just the way that you make me feel. You're somebody that that always wants to credit me with a lot of success. And I will tell you that I don't say it enough, but I certainly credit you with a lot of my success. Without being with you, without the relationship that we have, without growing and learning together, I don't think I am who I am. So thank you so much, my dear friend, for joining me here on the podcast.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, I don't know how you can come out of that conversation without a tear in your eye. I will tell you that Bradlee is somebody that, man, he just means so much to me. And being even just a small part of his journey, a small part of his story, is something that fills my heart. And every time that I hear him tell that story, I wasn't looking to save somebody. I wasn't looking for, a reclamation project. I was looking to hire an English teacher. And it turned into so much more than that. The impact that he has had on me is just so profound. So if you don't follow Bradlee, make sure you get down there in the show notes, get connected with Bradlee W. Skinner. Truly one of the absolute best educators on the planet. And now it's time for a pep talk. Today on the pep talk, I want to go at something that Bradlee talked about, and that specifically is the teacher leadership piece. When Bradlee first came to work with me at our school together, I know that he had a desire to be an administrator. He mentioned it during the show that he had earned his administrative credential and was pretty much in his mind headed in that direction. The second year that Bradlee was on our campus, I actually pulled him out of the classroom and brought him up to be an interim administrator for us for an entire classroom year. And ultimately, Bradlee was much more compelled to go back into the classroom and have that impact on students the way that he does now. And I think it's just so powerful that we don't lose sight of the importance of teacher leadership. You don't have to lead the classroom to be a leader. You don't have to be somebody who carries the title of administrator to be a leader. And here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast, I think I have probably inadvertently leaned heavily into just focusing on that school leader, that district leader. But man, those of you who are doing it every day in the classroom, and Katie and I talked about it last week on the show or midweek on the show about all 21 of those contributors who are a part of our book. Bradlee, of course, is one of them. So many of them who are still in the classroom are leading in an amazing way from the classroom. So my challenge for you this week is to really take a look at that and think about, if I'm a classroom teacher, what am I doing to take advantage of opportunities that I have, or finding opportunities for myself to lead from where I am? If I'm a school administrator, a district administrator, what am I doing to ensure that those who are in my classrooms know and are encouraged to take advantage of and to find, and that I'm supporting them in finding those leadership opportunities. Folks, teacher leadership is one of the most important things in terms of the outcomes that we want to see in our schools. When our teachers really take on those leadership roles, when it becomes a genuinely shared effort across our schoolhouse, that's when things really, really take off. So that's your challenge this week, is to really lean into that teacher leadership and ensure that that is happening in your classrooms. Thank you guys so much for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. If you haven't yet left us a 5-star review, given us a few words of encouragement, please do so. I ask you to do that, not only because I love to see and hear your feedback to help us continue to grow and get better, but also because every single one of those reviews helps drive that algorithm and gets our show in front of that many more people who are looking to lean into leadership. Get out there, folks. Have a road to awesome week.